The text message wasn't meant for me. That's what I kept telling myself as I stared at the glowing screen of Gerald's phone. My husband of 38 years had left it on the kitchen counter while he showered, and when it chimed with an incoming message, I glanced at it automatically. We'd never been the jealous, suspicious type of couple. We'd built a life, a family, a business together. Trust was our foundation, or so I thought. Can't wait to see you tonight. Last night was amazing. Still feeling you inside me. XOXO. H. I read the message 3 times, each word burning into my retinas like acid. My hands trembled as I set the phone down exactly as I'd found it. My mind raced with possibilities. A mistake, a joke, a colleague playing a prank. But deep down I knew. When Gerald came downstairs 15 minutes later, dressed in the pale blue button-down I'd given him for Christmas, his silver hair still damp, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. "Your phone got a message," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. It popped up on the screen. Gerald's face. The face I had loved for 4 decades. The face I knew better than my own went completely blank for a second before a flicker of annoyance crossed it. Not guilt, not shame. Annoyance. At that moment, I knew our marriage was already over. I just didn't know the how or why yet. "Evelyn," he said, reaching for his phone. "We need to talk." Those 4 words. The harbinger of heartbreak in countless novels and films. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Gerald Foster, my husband, partner, and father of our 2 adult children, told me with clinical detachment that he'd been seeing Heather Collins, a 31-year-old marketing coordinator from his company for the past 7 months. That she made him feel alive again, that he deserved happiness after all these years, as if our life together had been a prison sentence he'd finally completed. "I've rented an apartment downtown," he concluded, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'll pack some things today. My lawyer will be in touch about the house and other assets." Just like that. 38 years dismissed in a 3-minute conversation over cooling coffee. "Do you love her?" I asked, the only question that seemed to matter in that moment. Gerald sighed as if I was being difficult. "She understands me, Evelyn. She sees me as I am now, not who I was decades ago. We've grown apart. You must have felt it too." But I hadn't. That was the cruelest part. While Gerald had apparently been constructing his exit strategy, I'd been planning our retirement, looking at river cruises in Europe, considering whether we should downsize from our Seattle home now that the kids were settled on the East Coast. "Does Thomas know Amanda?" I asked, thinking of our son and daughter. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "Not yet. I thought it would be best coming from both of us." "You mean coming from me?" I said, my shock beginning to give way to anger. "You want me to smooth this over with our children while you play house with a woman barely older than they are?" "Don't be dramatic. Evelyn Heather is a mature professional woman. This isn't some tawdry affair." But it was. Whatever sophisticated gloss Gerald tried to put on it, he was leaving me his 63-year-old wife for his 31-year-old employee. It was a cliché, so common it was almost laughable. Except I wasn't laughing. My name is Evelyn Foster, soon to be Evelyn. Winters again, I suppose. Reclaiming my maiden name from before, I became Mrs. Gerald Foster. At the tender age of 25, I was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years before retiring 3 years ago. I raised 2 wonderful children, cared for Gerald's parents in their final years, and helped build Foster Construction from a risky startup to a respected mid-sized company. And none of that mattered. Now, apparently, I had been replaced, upgraded to a newer model. The next few weeks passed in a blur of pain and disbelief. Gerald moved out that same day, taking more of his belongings each time he returned to the house. I called Thomas in Boston and Amanda in Portland. Their shock and anger on my behalf was both comforting and heartbreaking. "He's having a midlife crisis at 65. Thomas said his professor's analytical mind trying to make sense of his father's behavior. It's disgusting, Amanda declared with the righteous indignation of a daughter seeing her family foundation crumble. Has he lost his mind? I didn't have answers for them. I barely had answers for myself. The true extent of Gerald's new life became clear through social media, a realm I'd always engaged with casually, but that now became a source of daily pain. Within 2 weeks, all our family photos disappeared from his profiles, replaced with images of Gerald and Heather at restaurants at a Seahawks game, on a weekend trip to Vancouver. He looked different in these photos, dressed more youthfully, sporting a new haircut, always smiling with the manic enthusiasm of someone trying to prove how happy they are. Heather, I had to admit, was beautiful in a glossy Instagram-ready way. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, the kind of fitness that comes from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers. In every photo she gazed at Gerald with apparent adoration, and he basked in it like a cat in sunlight. The comments were the worst. Friends and business associates offering congratulations, telling Gerald how great he looked, how happy they were for him. No mention of me, of our history, of the decades we'd spent in the same social circles. I had become an inconvenient footnote in Gerald's story, edited out for the new narrative he was crafting. A month after Gerald left, I ran into them at Canlis, the restaurant where we'd celebrated every anniversary for 20 years. I was there with Diane McKenzie, my closest friend since college, and a retired family lawyer trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. They were seated at what had always been our table by the window, overlooking Lake Union. "Evelyn," Gerald said when he spotted me, his expression a mixture of irritation and embarrassment. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," I replied, taking in the intimate table setting. The champagne bucket. Heather's low-cut black dress. "You must be Evelyn," Heather said with practiced politeness, extending her hand. "Gerald has told me so much about you." I didn't take her hand. I couldn't bear to touch the woman who was sleeping in what should have been my place. Instead, I looked directly at Gerald. "Thomas called. He and Michelle are expecting. You're going to be a grandfather." I walked away before I could see his reaction, but the satisfaction of dropping that bombshell news I had only received that morning and had planned to share privately was hollow. It didn't undo the humiliation of seeing them together, of being treated like an awkward acquaintance by the man who had once pledged his life to mine. But the real breaking point came a week later when Gerald called asking for money. "I need you to transfer $50,000 from the joint account," he said without preamble, "for a deposit on a trip." "A trip," I repeated, "to Europe, a river cruise. It's non-refundable, and the deadline is tomorrow." The river cruise we had been planning, the one I had researched for months, comparing itineraries, reading reviews. He was taking Heather on our dream retirement trip. "No," I said, surprising both of us with the firmness in my voice. "Excuse me." I said, "No, Gerald, I'm not financing your romantic getaway with your girlfriend." I couldn't bring myself to use cruder terms, though they sprang readily to mind. "It's our money, Evelyn," he said, his tone condescending. "Both our names are on that account. I'm entitled to it." "Then use your own access and transfer it yourself." "I'm tied up in meetings all day. The deadline is not my problem." I finished for him. "Goodbye, Gerald." I hung up, my heart pounding. It was the first time I had denied him anything significant in our marriage, even when I disagreed with his decisions. The vacation home we couldn't really afford. The boat he barely used, the investments I thought too risky. I had ultimately deferred to him on financial matters. Gerald was the businessman after all. I was just a teacher. That evening, Diane came over with a bottle of wine and a sympathy that had over the weeks evolved from gentle understanding to righteous anger on my behalf. "He wanted you to pay for their cruise," she repeated incredulously after I recounted the call. "The audacity of that man knows no bounds." "He's always been confident," I said, swirling the Merlot in my glass. "It's what made him successful in business. There's confidence and then there's entitlement," Diane replied, "and it sounds like Gerald has crossed firmly into the latter." She set her glass down with purpose. Evie, have you taken stock of your financial situation? Really looked at it closely? I shrugged. Our financial advisor is sending me statements. Gerald's lawyer mentioned something about a settlement agreement they're drafting. Don't wait for his lawyer, Diane said firmly. In fact, don't sign anything. His lawyer sends. You need your own representation, and you need to know exactly what assets you have jointly. We have the house, his retirement accounts, my pension from teaching. I trailed off, realizing how vague my knowledge was. Gerald had always handled the investments, the long-term planning. I managed the household budget, but left the larger financial picture to him. What about bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate besides the house? I shook my head. There's our main joint checking account, and I have my own small savings from my teaching days. Gerald has the business accounts, of course. Are you sure that's all? Diane pressed. Think carefully. Any accounts opened years ago that might not be active but still exist. Inheritances. Trust funds for the kids that you may be a signatory on. Something clicked in my memory. Well, there were those accounts we set up after my parents died. My inheritance went in there initially before we used most of it for the down payment on the lake house. I frowned trying to remember. And there was another joint account we opened for the business expansion in 2010. Gerald transferred my retirement savings there temporarily for cash flow reasons. Diane was already pulling out her laptop. Let's check those right now. Do you have online access? I did, though. I rarely used it. Gerald had set up the logins years ago, and I had dutifully recorded them in the small address book I kept in my desk drawer. Diane and I spent the next hour logging into forgotten accounts, following trails of investments and transfers. What we discovered left me breathless. The inheritance account still held over $300, $1,000, untouched for years. The business expansion account, which I thought had been closed after serving its purpose, contained nearly $280,000. And there was a third account I had completely forgotten, about a college savings vehicle for Thomas and Amanda that had never been needed thanks to scholarships and Gerald's business success. It held just under $200,000, nearly $800,000 in assets that Gerald had apparently forgotten about. Or perhaps he thought I had forgotten about them, or never knew they existed in the current form. He's been so focused on his primary investment portfolio and business accounts, he overlooked these smaller, older accounts. Diane said, a note of triumph in her voice. And you're still a full joint owner on all of them. What does that mean? I asked. Though I was beginning to understand it means. Diane said with a smile that held more than a hint of vindication. That you have options, Evie. It means Gerald made a serious miscalculation. That night after Diane left, I sat alone in the home Gerald and I had shared for 23 years. The house felt different now. Emptier with his things gone, but somehow less suffocating too. For the first time since he'd left, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I lay awake making plans. The next morning I called Thomas and Amanda and asked them to video chat that evening when their faces appeared on my screen. Thomas with his thoughtful eyes so like my own. Amanda with her determined chin that was pure Gerald. I felt a surge of strength. I've discovered something about our finances. I began and told them everything. The forgotten accounts. Gerald's request for cruise money, my growing realization that I had allowed myself to become financially dependent in ways I hadn't fully understood. Take it all, Mom, Amanda said immediately. Her pediatrician's compassionate nature was tempered by a streak of fierce protectiveness. After what he did, he doesn't deserve a penny. It's not about what he deserves, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. It's about what I deserve, what I've earned through our partnership. The law would likely see it that way, too. Thomas added the academic in him emerging. Washington is a community property state. In principle, you're entitled to half of all marital assets regardless. In principle, I repeated, but principles and practice aren't always aligned, are they? They both fell silent at that understanding the truth of it. Gerald had resources, connections, and a ruthless streak. I was only now beginning to fully comprehend. "What are you going to do?" Amanda finally asked. I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in months. "I'm going to take back my power, one step at a time." The next week was a flurry of activity. First, I met with a divorce attorney. Diane recommended not just any lawyer, but Catherine Sloan, known in Seattle legal circles as the Equalizer, for her work, ensuring fair settlements for spouses who had subordinated their careers for their partners. "Your situation is unfortunately common," Catherine told me after hearing my story. "But you have some advantages. The documented transfers of your personal funds and inheritance into marital and business assets, your direct contributions to the company's growth, and of course, these forgotten accounts." "What should I do about those?" I asked. "Legally, you have every right to access them," she said. "But strategy suggests we should be judicious. Moving all the money would look vindictive to a judge. But securing a portion of what you'll need for legal fees and living expenses, that's entirely reasonable." With Catherine's guidance, I transferred $350,000 from the forgotten accounts to a new account in my name. Only, I left the rest untouched, a gesture of good faith that I suspected would not be reciprocated when Gerald discovered what I'd done. Next, I met with a financial advisor recommended by Catherine, a woman in her 50s named Janelle, who specialized in helping newly single women navigate their financial independence. "Your financial literacy is actually better than you give yourself credit for," Janelle told me after our initial consultation. "You just deferred to your husband out of habit, not inability." With her help, I began to construct a post-Gerald financial identity. I invested a portion of the transferred funds in a diverse portfolio. I researched housing options for when I would inevitably need to leave the family home. And in a move that gave me particular satisfaction, I established a scholarship fund at the elementary school where I had taught for 30 years, the Evelyn Winters Educational Foundation. I said, trying out my maiden name again as we finalized the paperwork. It felt foreign on my tongue after so many years as Evelyn Foster, but also right somehow a return to my original self. Throughout these weeks, Gerald remained largely absent from my life, communicating through brief texts or calls about practical matters. He seemed to assume I was passively waiting for his lawyer's settlement proposal, perhaps spending my days watching daytime television and eating ice cream straight from the container. He couldn't have been more wrong. The confrontation when it came was both terrible and exhilarating. Gerald arrived at the house unannounced on a Saturday morning, letting himself in with his key as if he still lived there. "We need to talk," he said, finding me in the kitchen with my laptop open to an online course on investment strategies for women over 60. My accountant noticed some unusual activity in our accounts. "Our accounts," I repeated, closing my laptop. Interesting choice of words for someone who's been treating our marriage as ancient history. Gerald's face flushed with anger. "You transferred over $300,000, Evelyn, without discussing it with me. That's completely unacceptable." "Unacceptable," I echoed, "like leaving your wife of 38 years for a woman half her age. Like taking your mistress to our anniversary restaurant, like asking me to pay for your romantic getaway with my replacement. That kind of unacceptable." "This isn't about Heather," he snapped. "This is about you taking money that isn't just yours." "No, Gerald. This is about you forgetting that I exist as more than just your soon-to-be ex-wife. This is about you forgetting that I contributed to our marriage and your business in ways that may not show up on a balance sheet but are no less valuable." "My business," he emphasized. "I built Foster Construction from nothing, with my inheritance as seed money." I reminded him, with me working extra tutoring jobs to make ends meet in those early years, with me raising our children practically single-handedly while you worked 80-hour weeks, with me entertaining your clients, hosting your partners, supporting your dreams. Gerald waved his hand dismissively. "That's what partners do. It doesn't entitle you to clean out accounts behind my back." "I didn't clean them out," I said calmly. "Check the balances. More than half the money is still there. I took what I need to ensure I'm protected during our divorce. Protected. He laughed without humor. From what I've always been more than generous. I was going to offer you the house a fair portion of my retirement. Your retirement, I interrupted. Your generosity. Your terms. That's the problem, Gerald. You still think this is all yours to distribute as you see fit. As if I'm a faithful employee receiving a severance package rather than your wife of nearly 4 decades. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the granite surface that we had selected together 15 years ago now, a demilitarized zone between warring nations. My lawyer will be contacting yours, Gerald finally said, his voice cold. This changes things, Evelyn. Yes, I agreed. It does. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. I had stood my ground. I had claimed my worth. The girl I had been when I met Gerald, eager to please, willing to mold myself to his expectations, would never have recognized the woman I had become. But I liked to think she would have been proud. The next weeks brought a flurry of legal maneuvers. Gerald's lawyer, a shark-like man with cold eyes and an expensive suit, sent aggressive letters demanding the return of misappropriated funds. Catherine responded with detailed accountings of my contributions to the marriage and business, including the inheritance I had invested in Foster Construction's early days. He's overplaying his hand, Catherine assured me during one particularly tense week. He thought you would roll over. Every move he makes now reeks of desperation and vindictiveness. Judges don't look kindly on that. She was right. When we finally sat down for mediation, Gerald and his attorney across the table from Catherine and me, the power dynamic had shifted palpably. Gone was the certainty that he would dictate terms. Instead, with Catherine's meticulous preparation and my calm testimony about our marriage, we achieved what Gerald's lawyer grudgingly called an equitable division. I would keep the house until I chose to sell it. I would receive 40% of the value of Foster Construction, a company built with my support, and crucially my inheritance. I would keep my pension and half of our investment portfolio, and I would retain full ownership of the Scholarship Foundation I had established. Gerald's face throughout the final mediation session was a study in barely contained fury. This was not how he had envisioned his clean break. His new life with Heather was turning out to be considerably more expensive than planned. Speaking of Heather, I began hearing rumors through mutual acquaintances. She had expected a wealthier, more carefree lifestyle than Gerald could now provide. She was frustrated by the legal complications, the financial constraints. She had thought she was getting a successful businessman, ready to shower her with luxury, not a man embroiled in a contentious divorce with dwindling resources. I took no pleasure in these rumors. Well, perhaps a little. I'm only human. 1 year after Gerald's fateful text message, I hosted a family dinner in my new home. A charming craftsman bungalow, closer to the water, smaller than our family home, but perfectly suited to my needs. Thomas and his wife Michelle brought their 6-month-old daughter, Emma Amanda, and her husband David drove up from Portland. We gathered around my new dining table, smaller than the formal one in the old house, but somehow allowing for more intimate conversation. To Mom, Thomas said, raising his glass. Who taught us all what resilience really looks like? To Grandma, Amanda added, lifting Emma's tiny hand in a mock toast. Who showed us it's never too late to reinvent yourself? I looked around at my children, my grandchild feeling a fullness in my heart that had been absent for so long. Gerald's absence was no longer a wound, but merely a fact like the weather or the color of the walls, present, but not defining. After dinner. As we sat in the living room with coffee and the apple pie I had baked that morning, Amanda asked the question they had been carefully avoiding. Have you heard from Dad lately? I nodded. He called last week. He and Heather broke up. A silence fell over the room. I could see them processing this information, trying to gauge my reaction. Are you okay with that? Thomas finally asked. I considered the question seriously. I'm sad for him, I said truthfully. Not because I want him back, that ship has sailed completely, but because I think he's realizing that what he threw away was worth more than he understood. What I didn't share was the rest of that conversation. Gerald's hesitant suggestion that perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime, to catch up. His mention that he drove by the elementary school and saw the new sign for the Evelyn Winters Educational Foundation. His awkward compliment about how good I apparently looked in the photos Thomas had shared from Emma's christening. I had declined the coffee invitation, politely but firmly. Some bridges once burned should remain crossed, not out of bitterness or anger, but because the person who reaches the other side is different from the one who began the journey. That night after my family had gone, and I was alone in my new home, I sat on my porch overlooking the distant shimmer of Puget Sound. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, devastated, lost, defined by what I had lost. And I thought about the woman I was now, stronger. Certainly, but also more authentic, more truly myself than I had been in decades. Gerald had left me for a woman half my age after 38 years together. He had forgotten about our joint bank accounts. Yes, but more importantly, he had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, the steel beneath my accommodating exterior. The intelligence behind my supportive smile, the woman who had always been there, waiting for the chance to emerge. In losing what I thought was the foundation of my life, I had found something far more valuable myself. And unlike Gerald, that was something I would never forget again. The following spring, I expanded the Scholarship Foundation to include a financial literacy program for young women I began dating occasionally. Nothing serious, but enjoyable dinners with interesting men who appreciated conversation with a woman of substance. I took a watercolor class and discovered to my surprise a latent artistic talent that had gone unexplored during my teaching years. Gerald's life took a different trajectory. Foster construction struggled without the network of relationships I had helped cultivate over the decades. He dated sporadically, but couldn't seem to recreate the instant adoration Heather had initially provided. He aged visibly in the aftermath of our divorce, the stress etching new lines around his eyes and mouth. When we encountered each other at Emma's first birthday party, neutral territory where we maintained carefully cordial interactions for our children's sake, he pulled me aside briefly. "You look happy, Evelyn," he said, an unspoken question in his voice. "I am," I replied simply. "I made a mistake," he said after a moment, his voice low. I studied his face, once so beloved, now simply familiar in the way old photographs become. I felt no triumph at his admission, no vindication, only a quiet acknowledgement of truth. "Yes, I agreed you did." I rejoined the party where Amanda was recording Emma's determined but unsuccessful attempts to eat cake with her tiny hands. As I watched my family, this family that remained mine, despite Gerald's departure from it, I reflected on the strange gift his betrayal had ultimately been. In trying to discard me, he had instead forced me to discover my own value, not as a wife, mother, or accessory to his success, but as Evelyn, just Evelyn whole and complete in myself. Some might call it revenge, this flourishing of mine in the aftermath of abandonment. But I prefer to think of it as justice, as balance restored, as the natural consequence of underestimating a woman who had spent decades putting others first, and was finally gloriously prioritizing herself. What Gerald forgot about our joint bank accounts was significant. What he forgot about me was immeasurable. And in that forgetting, he gave me the opportunity to remember who I had always been, beneath the roles I had played so diligently. For that, paradoxically, I can almost thank him. Almost.